As I say, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, Rotarians and all the colleagues in peace. I am Jim Alderman. I'm the chair of the Peace Committee in District 5450, and we sponsor the Forum for Discussion. Tonight, we're indeed honored this evening to have a very special individual with us. Elizabeth Hume is the executive director of the Alliance for Peace Building. The Alliance is the umbrella organization for NGOs working on conflict resolution, bridge building, and reconciliation in the US and around the world. I'll assume you've read Liz's impressive and extensive bio. What you may not know is that Liz believes peace builders have been doing a poor job in communicating with the public. Too academic, not connecting with issues that concern everyday Americans. I, for one, am eager to hear about the future of peace and security. Liz, the screen is now yours.
Okay, so just to what some of the rules are, how long do you want me to talk for or
Generally speaking, 30, 40 minutes, and then
okay.
leave at least 15, 20 minutes or more for a
Okay.
Q&A. You'll find this to be an inquisitive audience.
Okay, that's the way I like it. Well, it's been a rough year or so. I'm sure you're all aware of what happened in February 2025. Um, the Trump administration cut pretty much all of development assistance. Some of it has come back online. Some of the health programs are still there, the humanitarian programs, and things are starting to slowly come back online. But the peace building sector was pretty demolished, and uh, it's been a bit of a blow because we had really started, or not started, but had really done some really good work, had some great evidence to show what was working, not working. And so much of that has been wiped out now. You have some philanthropy stepping up. And it's not just, the US foreign aid cuts fell by a staggering 56.9% compared to 2024. And at the same time, uh, other countries like Germany are following suit because as the US government pulls out of security, military, um, out of Europe, they have to fill their security gaps. Germany, for example, in their constitution, they cannot go into deficit spending like the US can. So, as one of the other larger donors, they're also cutting. The UK has cut. So, why is this important? Because since about 2014, we started, violent global conflict started increasing pretty rapidly. And by 2018, we hit global record breaking and violent conflict, and we've just continued. We've just increased. We've broken all sorts of records, not seen since World War II. And I could go on and give all the statistics of, migration, refugees, but I don't need to do that because you all, if you're working or, you're interested in the peace building sector, you know how bad it is out there. So at the time of increasing global violent conflict, we've done away with the very tools needed to try to tackle, to prevent and reduce conflict and build sustainable peace. And due to these cuts, since early 2025, there's been a lot of research, and conflicts, for example, in Africa rose by 5% since the suspension of US aid activities. And we, that number 5% is kind of, well, 5%, Um, uh, but when you start going around the world and looking at all the things that have been cut, uh, we are seeing things like in Nigeria. There was amazing programs that were running in Nigeria dealing with interethnic, interreligious violence and early warning systems, conflict resolution. And a lot of people will be like, "Oh, well, those were just localized projects. They didn't scale up. Really, what was the harm?" Well, the harm was, if you remember on Christmas, last Christmas, the United States bombed Nigeria because they felt like the Christians were being attacked. In Mozambique, we're seeing ISIS is surging in the wake of shuttered countering violent extremism programming in the north. Um, in other countries like in Bangladesh where you have Rohingya refugee camps, we're seeing increase in extremism, accelerating exploitation of women and children. Uh, in coastal West Africa, where the Global Fragility Act, which I'll talk about a little bit, was working. Really, for the first time, we were starting to get at prevention because violent extremism in coastal West Africa was increasing due to arms coming through from Libya and also from the Sahel violence. These programs have been shuttered. And I could go on and just give you more and more and more examples of this. And we are not even seeing the, w we're seeing these cuts, but as you all know, conflict isn't linear. It's not something that, it goes up and down. It is, we haven't even seen the knock on, the sort of the ripple effects, that will come in 5 years, 10 years. So it's pretty devastating. And but it's pretty devastating. But there are things we can do and we are doing. So, I'll get to that in a second, but um things weren't always working, right? Things weren't working particularly well. We'd done a lot of really good work, but there were a lot of problems. There really were. We worked really hard to get a law passed called the Global Fragility Act. We originally started it out and started working on it in 2015. We called it the Violence Reduction Act, and we wanted to, build it off of PEPFAR for violence, like a PEPFAR, right? That we wanted to have a huge program of like, let's really end violence. Um, and part of the reason why we were very concerned about this at the time, and this is going back into 2015, because we started seeing conflict go up, but also the Obama administration was raiding all the peace building budgets and the conflict prevention budgets. Their big focus was on Electrify Africa. And their point was, we don't know if this really works. We don't really see the evidence. So if you can't prove it, then we're not going to fund it. And they really did a number on these budgets. And it was there that we got kind of annoyed with the Obama administration and said, we're going to go to Congress. And we pulled together bipartisan support. Originally in the Senate, it was Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Coons from Delaware. They were our sponsors. Secretary Rubio was number two sponsor on this bill. And we had the same, we had bipartisan support in the House. And how did we garner this support? We told people that a lot of the way our assistance was working was kind of designed back in like the 80s and the 90s. And it really hadn't adapted. We used to laugh and say, how you procured programming. Uh, I would ask students when I would be giving a talk and say, hey, from the minute we decided that we were going to do a program in, let's say, Ethiopia, how long do you think it would take us to get that ideal going and, do assessments and then put it out to bid and then, the groups would, bid on it, get accepted, go out, start doing programming. And I would ask students, and they would say 3 months, and then I would laugh, and I would say more like 18 months, and that's pretty quick. Programs weren't adapting. Going back to Mozambique as the example, uh, it was, even USAID's own assessments would go in and say, right. This is what's, you have violent extremism in the north. That's where all the industry is. We really need to work on human rights abuses and corruption and what's driving violent extremism in the north and get at prevention. And then USA, so those were USAID's own assessments. And then what would happen is they would look at the budgets, they would have earmarks from Congress, and they would say, right, okay, I'm just making this number up, of your $40 million in Mozambique, 96% will be health. Another 3% will go to education. Another 1% would go to livelihoods. Here's your $500,000 to deal with violent extremism in the North. And, nobody wants to be that jerk in the room that says, don't fund health or education. But we wanted it to be more responsible, more reasonable, more at par, so that you weren't just working on health and education, but not addressing the conflict issues. So, yeah, your health and education indicators would go up, but a conflict could come through there and wipe all that out. So that was a really, that's how we went into it. And we were like, we got to do things differently, right? The status quo is not working. Let's do it differently. So we worked on this bill in Congress, totally bipartisan. And it really focused in on, let's do one strategy for these countries. Let's have the State Department, Development, and DoD all working together, not separately, working together and actually talking and focusing on locally led solutions and creating programs that were adaptable and that were flexible. And that we would think about, okay, well, how do we center and prioritize conflict prevention and peace building? How do we do that and do that right? And again, doesn't mean you don't do health programs or education programs. It just means that you're taking conflict prevention and building peace seriously, and you're centering it and prioritizing it. So, that law took a long time to get done. It passed in December 2019. And just to show you, I mean, you guys all know how tough it is to get things done. And just because the law passed doesn't mean that it was being implemented. So my daughter, I started working on this. I had when one of my daughters was in middle school, and I was driving her back from UVA her freshman year. I was driving her back home, and somebody from the State Department was texting me and, saying there was, an issue with the funding um, or like the countries that we were picking. And she, I was driving, so I was not reading my text. And so she was reading my text and she was saying, Mommy, somebody, Jason from the State Department is texting you and saying there's a problem with the GFA, da da da. And she looked at me and said, Are you kidding me? That thing hasn't gotten implemented yet. Like you've been working on that since I was in middle school. So she's out of college now. She's now at Cambridge, getting her master's. So, we're still struggling with it. So it does show you things move slowly, but you can't give up. So We did. We had this Global Fragility Act, and it was, bipartisan, it was reform oriented. We had wanted it to be global, but they wanted to see how it worked in priority countries, really pilot. And that the countries chosen were Mozambique, coastal West Africa, Papua New Guinea, because there was significant violence towards women, and Libya and Haiti. Now, of course, Haiti was chosen when it was one of the most improved countries prior to the president being killed. And we all know where Haiti is right now. But You know, it was a slog to try to get this implemented. Under the Trump administration, we actually got a lot further. When the Biden administration came in, because it wasn't their initiative, it wasn't their law, um, they just didn't really take it that seriously. And, we would have to go back up to the Hill all the time and get them to call down to the NSC and the White House. Um, and it was frustrating because, we had this now tool. We knew we could make changes. We knew we could adapt. We could, deal with conflict much better. And in coastal West Africa, we started doing it. They set up programs, regional programs, strategies. They were working with the Dutch and the Germans and the UN, and these programs were getting off the ground, prevention programs. And then everything got cut out underneath us in early 2025. And, it's easy to get upset and to, you know, what's the point? Um, I take a different approach. My approach is we have an opportunity now. There were things that were broken. Let's keep those broken. There are ways where we can rebuild it, reform it, and transform it. And that's really where we're looking in the future, for how uh, we build on some of the things that the Trump administration that we think make sense, um, but also try to rebuild some of the areas that were, uh, I don't want to say ripped apart, but yes, ripped apart. So, so the one thing that's kind of weird to know right now is that, and sometimes we feel like it's a little Alice in Wonderland, because we are still advocating for all the old accounts and budgets prior to 2025. And Congress is appropriating the money just like it was all existing. So, for example, in the last fiscal year, the Prevention and Stabilization Fund that funds the Global Fragility Act received $108 million dollars. Women, Peace, and Security received $112 million dollars in FY26. Atrocity prevention that we work on too, got 6 million, and they're increasing the figure in 2027 to 8 million. But programs aren't coming out. The work isn't getting done. So right now, and Congress is, Trump has rescinded a lot of that money. He did it last year. So the Congress allowed them to take the money back, not spend it on these things. And Congress hasn't done a lot of oversight. So, we're still advocating for these funds. We still want them there. Um, but, you know, the programs aren't getting out, right? Okay, so where do we go from here? And I think this is what you guys really want to know. But I wanted to set the stage to see where we were. So, we have to recognize that there's this opportunity to reimagine, reform, transform U.S. assistance, diplomacy. As you all might know, U.S. aid was pulled into the State Department. And, my argument to folks on the Hill is, even if the Democrats, let's say, take back the House, we need to keep these issues bipartisan. They were always bipartisan. As you can see, Senator Lindsey Graham, Secretary Rubio, were our top two sponsors on our Global Fragility Act bill. We don't want this to go back to a tit for tat, right? So the Democrats, rebuild aid, and then the Republicans take it down, and we don't want that. So what we're saying is it's now moved into the State Department. Just leave it there and let's rebuild it there. Um, and this isn't unprecedented. The UK did it, Australia did it. They moved their development assistance into their foreign office. And I will tell you, if many of you have worked in the government, there's a lot of bureaucratic infighting. I spent a lot of my times doing shuttle diplomacy between the NSC, USAID, State Department, getting them to agree to, sometimes some kind of simple things. Um, so, we're okay if it sits in the State Department. And mind you, Democrats and Republicans also talked about pulling USAID into the State Department. When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she really pushed for that. So, our point is it's there. Let's keep it there. Let's rebuild it there. They do have a humanitarian bureau. Uh, the Democracy Rule of Law Bureau still exists. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to rebuild it there. One of the things we have to do, though, is get a lot of the conflict, I call it the conflict expertise back. The CSO Bureau, the Conflict Stabilization Office, was wiped out. It was just gone. So all that incredible expertise doesn't exist anymore. One office that got taken out in that bureau was the Negotiation Support Unit. Finally, they put together a negotiation support unit that understood best practices of negotiation and peacemaking. And, when you were coming and doing a peace agreement, we all just think if you're in the State Department, you must know that, but people don't. People, in the State Department never go to areas that are conflict affected. They might spend their time in Paris, and then the next thing you know, they're in Sudan. So that office got wiped out. So there's lots of things that we're trying to do to get that expertise put back. And once again, our bipartisan friends in the House, Representative Sarah Jacobs from San Diego, Representative Michael McCall from Texas, they put a bill out that would create a permanent and dedicated Center for Conflict Analysis, Planning, and Prevention within the State Department. So we're trying to get a Senate companion piece for that bill. So where do we go? Like I said, we want some things to stay broken because they were broken. But what we want to do is take the Global Fragility Act, for example, and put it on steroids and say, okay, we're going to go into a country and we're going to have one strategy where you're looking at, what's driving instability, what's driving conflict, what's driving violence. How do we address that? And at the same time, work on programs that, are obviously, the health related, and making sure that all of these programs are integrated. Because today, well, before all of this, programs weren't integrated. And I'll give you an example. When Ebola hit DRC, pre-COVID, uh, after it was all, they, ended the pandemic, the Ebola pandemic, we sat down with folks from USAID, health and humanitarian folks, and said, what happened? Like, what what are we doing wrong here? Um, and their point was, well, we don't understand it. We were providing all this assistance and aid and health, and they were firebombing the health clinics, they were killing doctors. And my point was, because you were in the middle of a conflict zone, right? So you need us and we need you. And we need to start working closely together to make sure that these programs aren't just not doing harm, but we're also able to integrate conflict prevention into the health sector, into the humanitarian sector. And so we have a bit of a window there to do that as well. Again, the bureaucracy really fought back. And, it's not really what people wanted to do. They kind of protected their bureaucracy. So that's what we're doing right now. We're looking at the why, why do we do it? What do we need to get done? And then more importantly, the how. And I think this is a really important piece of this is that so many times people just write reports and, recommendations and they sit on a shelf, but they never get implemented. So that's really what we're looking at right now. Do we have a tool, let's say in Congress, to be able to do it? Yes, no. If we do, then we use that tool and we, modify that. If we don't, then we have to make a tool, like we did with the Global Fertility Act or the Elie Wiesel Atrocity Prevention Act. But recognize that we still have things on the books. All these things are still law. We call it the prevention canon oriented laws. And it's also important to understand this is also, it's bipartisan that they work together, but it was also bipartisan that they didn't do what they needed to do, right? Democrat or Republicans. The atrocity board that was set up under the Obama administration, it really didn't do anything. The atrocity board that was set up under the Biden administration to look at early warning and focus in on countries and try to get assistance there that were showing signs of atrocities didn't do anything. The atrocity board on the last Trump administration didn't do anything. In fact, this I was talking with my colleague at work today, and she's like, I was over at the State Department today talking about, the atrocity reports and things. She's like, I can't even talk about it right now. I'll tell you tomorrow. So there are things that we can be doing. We can be making sure that the laws that are on the books are implemented robustly and that we reform the system. But this is something that's really important, and I think this is really where you all come in. The reason why USAID was such an easy target is because we didn't have a constituency, a public constituency like you do for the education or ag departments, and they were easy to let go. And also, uh, people still think that our foreign assistance is like, 10%, which we all know that's not true. It's like a half of a penny or something like that, of is what our foreign assistance is. So how do we get people to understand in America that what happens over there impacts us here? And that it's getting kind of easier to do, right? Like the Iran war, your gas is gone up, fertilizer is going to get, we might not be able to produce the food that we need. uh it's easier to see that connection now because we're in a much more interconnected global war. I was reading an article yesterday and we were talking about it. Japan and China, things are not looking good between them right now. And China is, making, uh, uh, thinking about making their moves on Taiwan. Well, what's in Taiwan? They're the makers of all the chips we need for our cars and our computers and so, understanding how things that happen over there do impact us here, and we need to care about things over there. Another thing is, I've worked on some of the campaigns on the foreign policy teams. The presidential campaigns didn't care about it. They would be very clear, elections aren't won on foreign policy. We don't care. Well, probably that's not going to be true again, right? What happened with Israel, Gaza, Trump told us he wasn't going to get into wars. I mean, we're pretty bogged down in the Middle East right now. So we have to care and we have to get our politicians and our candidates that are going to be running for office to care about these issues. And that's really where you all come in. Um, we need Rotary. We need Rotary to be our big champion on these issues. I tell everybody when I'm at panels, Rotary is the greatest, largest peace building organization globally. They're known for polio, but they're also known for peace building. So that's what we're really excited to do. We really want to work with you. We have this Future of Peace and Security Coalition. And, it's probably not, we're not going to see the reforms we need in a year or 2 years. It might take even a couple more years than that. But we just have to have reform. We have to be able to start tackling uh, these record-breaking global violent conflict numbers. So I'll end there and open for questions.
Oh, oh, wow. Thank you, Liz. So many questions. Where do we begin? Certainly, we need to begin talking to our politicians. And I was reading an article the other day, what most people don't realize that 99.9% of our politicians are not federal politicians.
That's true.
And all of our local who are not aware of the issues, let alone are concerned for the issues. So it's time we begin to speak out.
Yeah. And think about, one of the other things is we have to start bifurcating domestic issues and foreign policy issues. And I think that's a really important piece in terms of, the conflict and the grievances and the instability that we're experiencing here in the US also have an impact around the world as well. So, we also have to get our own house in order.
We certainly need our own house in order, but do we need as strong a demarcation between local and international issues? Because,
No.
point out, it all affects us.
Yep, exactly. Was that a question? I just agreed with you.
No, that was a statement, but we can build on that.
Okay.
And
Well,
I
I
know
agree.
Richard Benton is working very hard to expand this Rotary in Action program. Am I correct, Richard?
Yes, definitely. I fully agree with you that we can have our biggest bang for the buck at the municipal level. I used to be a mayor, and the municipal level is the closest to the people, and I think that's where we can have an influence. I'm less optimistic at the federal level, but
Yeah, but you know how we can kind of fix the federal level is practicing peace building at home in our own communities. That I think is, getting people to work on issues together, communicating, trusting each other. If we can do that at the local level and then that builds up, maybe we could start fixing some of the extreme partisan issues at the federal level. But once again, remember, people always are like, I cannot believe you got the Global Fragility Act passed in 2019, right? These are bipartisan issues. So we walk into Republican and Democrat offices, they're like, we hear you, we agree with you, right? So, you know, and like I said, what happened in the beginning of the Trump administration was kind of rogue. It wasn't meant to happen. I mean, that was like Elon Musk and another individual, somebody named Pete Morocco, who had a vengeance towards US aid. If you read that Vanity Fair article with Donald Trump's chief of staff, they say that wasn't their intention. That it just, kind of went haywire. But like I said, because there was no, constituency out there to push back on it, it was easy pickings.
I think that's a critical point to keep in mind. The lack of constituency, as soon as I learn how to say the word here, it kind of is the first thing to go. Um, the things that make the most noise are the last to go. So how do we sell this idea and the whole concept of talking about peace? We need another semantics that is more catching to the reality of the issues we're dealing with. Patricia,
Well, yeah.
much too quiet.
Yeah, I mean I'm going to send you the book talk with Dr. Gary Slutkin, the book The End of Violence. He made a big play for we need a campaign to end violence.
Um,
Um, and that goes back to the PEPFAR, and that goes back to, what you all did with polio. Let's treat violence as a disease and, you know, pull up a campaign, uh, to get people to understand that there are things they can do. They can end violence. We can't end conflict, right? Because conflict exists. You and I get in a room together, we're going to disagree about that's conflict. But violent conflict is not inevitable. And that's really where we have to be pushing. And one other point that's really important right now, you all remember, I remember, the last nuclear treaty between Russia and the US, the START treaty, ended in last March or February. We don't have a nuclear arms agreement right now. And that's one of the times I remember, going back into the 80s, uh, that's where the country was really united on this, on nuclear weapons. And so, that's also another entry point. And AFP is connecting more back in with the nuclear disarmament threat initiatives and working closer together because the peace building field came out of that work.
I'm, can you talk a little more about what the CSO, the conflict stabilization, what did they really do and how did they work and how can we rebuild?
So there was a lot of expertise in there. They looked at early warning of conflict. They had this negotiation support unit. They were the secretariat for the Global Fragility Act, for the atrocity boards. They were the major conflict hub in the State Department. There was also a companion bureau over at USAID that we got built up under the first Trump administration under Ambassador Mark Green. They put together a big conflict bureau, right? And they were really looking at violence, conflict prevention, uh, and that was the goal of these offices or these bureaus.
Richard Denton has a question.
Hi, Richard.
Yep. Thank you again. Uh, great talk here. I'm just wondering, you mentioned Rotary,
Hmm.
and how do you see then Rotary playing a role? Rotary is at the United Nations and can, I think, play a role, but I'm not sh but I don't see it happening yet, and I'm wondering how you see Rotary playing a role.
Well, you know, you have such a footprint all over the world. I'm
correct?
always amazed when I'm with Rotarians. They're like, "Oh, I'm going to go to a meeting in Geneva," right? You guys are everywhere. Um, you're leaders in your communities, right? And so, peace building is one of your big pillars. So, I don't know yet. I mean, I'm kind of more looking at you all. Um, uh, you know, help us with the campaign to end violence. Um, uh, you know, yeah, I mean, I'm not I I understand Rotary a lot. Rebecca Krall, from Rotary in Chicago is on our board, but I also don't understand Rotary because you're also very decentralized. So I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I think that's a bit of the problem is that Rotarians tend to be very conservative. Yes, peace is our oldest area of focus, but it's also our least funded area
Right.
of focus. Uh, we uh, did partner with Institute for Economics and Peace and
Hmm.
focused on positive peace, but we have done very little in terms of negative peace, in terms of
Hmm.
prevention, in terms of uh, trying to defuse wars. We have been successful occasionally in getting ceasefires. We did have a ceasefire in Gaza to immunize children on two occasions. We had a ceasefire in Sri Lanka to do the same. But we, I think, could be doing much more. The uh, International Committee for the Red Cross has a similar position at the United Nations and comes out
Hmm.
annually with statements against nuclear weapons. Uh, Many of us feel that that's a humanitarian issue and, as you say, bipartisan. Uh, but Rotary certainly won't go there. Uh, I think Rotary currently is looking over its shoulders and doesn't want to lose its charity status, and therefore is becoming even more conservative in terms of not becoming involved in these areas. Uh, Back in 1945, we were uh, very instrumental in the formation of the United Nations and uh, the Human Declaration on Human Rights. But uh, currently, we don't seem to be that active. And I'm again looking to you to see what else we might do. I think partnering with other organizations, World
Hmm.
Beyond War, etc. Um, I'm wondering, you're involved in obviously conflict settlement. We have a Rotarian, Ernest Thiessen, who has a program called Smart Settle. It's a computer program based on the work of John Nash, Nobel laureate. And I think that would be helpful. But again, it's getting someone to use that program. So I don't
Yeah.
know how that would be helpful. I mean, I think
Well,
it would be
yeah.
helpful, but I don't know how to get it implemented.
Yeah. I mean, but the thing about it is that, you know, I hope I've tried to come across is that these are bipartisan issues.
Correct.
How is ending violence political, right? And so that's what we're getting at. AFP is nonpartisan. We have Republicans on our board too, right? So um, you know, and so that's one of the things we've started kicking around, right? Is, do we have an end violence campaign? Um, uh, and one of the things I was actually just looking at, I don't know if you know Patricia Schaefer.
Yes.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
New Gen Peace Builders is a member of AFP, and I work really closely with her. And we're
She's
looking.
on tonight here.
Oh, is she?
Hey, Liz.
Oh my gosh. Hey, Patricia. And so one of the things, well, you should be answering these questions. Um, thinking about, we're seeing conflict and polarization at US universities. So we know there's lots of programs running on there, but how do we scale them, figure out what's working, what's not working? How do we, hold universities accountable? Uh, and one of the things that Patricia and I have been looking at is this fire score, which is all about freedom of, not being censored. And the really important thing is this isn't a Democrat problem. It's not a Republican problem. It's an every American problem. And that's really where Patricia and I are looking at this, at the universities. But I don't know, Patricia, you know Rotary better than anyone. How do we get Rotary more involved in these issues?
Yeah. Well, so as some people on this Zoom would know, I've been speaking a lot lately about sort of the catch-22 of Rotary. And the catch-22 of Rotary is much of the work that gets done in Rotary gets done through global grants. But if you look at funds put against global grants in the Rotary system, far and away, it's disease prevention, a long history of that. And that's even when you take polio out in terms of funding. And then you sort of work the 7 areas of focus, and peace is one of the 2 least funded areas of Rotary. And the funding that does go towards peace is mostly towards the peace centers. And I'm grateful for that. I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow. So the presentations I've been giving say that, we're in a catch-22. We have to incubate a lot more well-informed peace projects at the community level. The more you incubate those well-informed projects with Rotarians who are equipped to do that, the more that drives funding, the more you drive funding, the more projects get funded and so on. So I think internally and at the local level, that's an opportunity. That's one. And then 2, I think the thing that I have been saying of late, which is a complete 180 for me, I have spent most of my time in the last 12 years talking about positive peace. And then, as you know, Liz, I was in Lebanon working with young professionals there, training them in peace when the war broke out. And so the war broke out, and it was very difficult to get out of Lebanon. You call one of the biggest embassies in the world, and you hear a recording that says, if you're an American citizen in Beirut, there is nothing we can do for you. There is no evacuation plan. We cannot support you. Find yourself a commercial flight, when there's only one airline flying out of the country. In a country of 5.9 million people, 1 million people have been displaced, with shelters for only 130,000 people. There are 86,000 people in Lebanon who have American citizenship. And for me, one of the things that has changed dramatically, and I feel this strongly about Rotary now, is we have to be working on positive peace. And Richard Denton had this long before I did. You have to be working on positive peace, and you have to be vocal about, enormous acts of mass destruction are just absolutely unacceptable.
Yes.
And we're afraid to say that, whereas Rotarians 80 years ago said that all the time.
Well, and that's what
Exactly.
Dr. Gary Slutkin says. I asked him that exact question with the end of violence. Everyone says, like negative peace is like bad, right? And his point is you got to do both. You got to end violence and you got to build positive peace. So like let's get to it and not be afraid to talk about ending violence.
I'd like to come back to this conversation, a couple points, but Cheryl has had her hand up for very long time, and I suspect her hand is getting very tired.
It's getting a little tired. No, it's great. Um, I agree with everything said, and one thing that wouldn't take a lot of money is a united campaign with everyone, like all these great agencies, Rotary and like all the agencies. Like if we could have a simple campaign, a peace campaign that like one with a simple idea that's ground up. I mean, but they're just for one idea is the Germans have like a table in bars and cafes and stuff that people can go peacefully discuss things. And I mean, I was just thinking like have a campaign where there's areas in local bars and cafes and pubs like that people can respectfully discuss things and the theme could kind of be peace, the peace talks kind of for locals. Um, and that's just an idea of like a campaign, like if we could just all get behind something that doesn't require a lot of money, but is community building and politically like bipartisan, but also um, you know, behind the idea of building peace and some, but I think uniting in some really good campaigns, I
Yeah.
think, is a idea.
No, I mean, that's what we're starting to kick around. And working with folks at Beyond Conflict and Dr. Sletkin, and others, to think about, okay, well, what does this look like now, right?
Yeah.
Stephen, do you have your hand up for a question?
Yes, thank you. I can't find my artificial hand on the app, so I had to use my real one.
It
Um,
works.
Thank you for what you've been telling us, Liz. You said something earlier about going back to the municipal level, which I think is a good training ground for future leaders who could be informed more on and more engaged with the peacemaking process. But what I think would be helpful for me, and I don't know about, I can't speak for the other Fort Collins folks, is how do we lower the temperature
Hmm.
of conflict at a local level, not just with our leadership, but with our citizenry? Um, I mean, I know all of these horrific things are happening across the world, but we're not doing much here to keep our own temperature down. And I think we have to, at least to some extent, we have to start there, and resources for that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, AFP has started a initiative called Peace Building Starts at Home. And it's really, there's a couple of, you know, pieces to it. One is education, so that people really understand what's driving conflict and grievances in the United States. Um, and, I'll just give you an example. You know, um, well, grievances, I always say this, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. People have grievances. They can be real or perceived. And people's perceived grievances are just as, has just as much impact as real ones. And so, getting curious as to why people are thinking, why people have difference of opinion and where it's coming from. And, Jim, we started this whole conversation talking about neuroscience, right? We know very little about the brain, but we're starting to know more. What does your brain on conflict look like, right? We still have our caveman brains. Um, and, you know, there are things that are, I don't know if you've heard the new data that's come out from the University of Chicago, Dr. Pop. Um, he has a new book coming out as well, and he's on the rounds doing this. And part of it is just understanding it. He did the deep dive into who, actually breached the Capitol on January 6th. And, I was shocked. I thought it was, like whatever, it was Proud Boys, people from, West Virginia, rural people that were very upset. And it wasn't. Well, they were there. But the majority of people that breached the Capitol on January 6th were from Orange County, were from Loudoun County, were from Broward County. They were accountants, they were small business owners. Um, so, you know, there's some real grievances there that people have, and we need to be listening to everyone, right? And not dehumanizing anyone. And that's where I think that we have to do a better job. And that's where you really can do it at the community level because you know your neighbors, right? You have to work together. You work together on issues all the time. I mean, that's program we do in Nigeria. We have to be doing more of that here. And I was actually really shocked when COVID hit the US. I thought for sure we would pull together because that's what we always do, right? We're Americans. We pull together. Uh, I was shocked at how badly we did preventing or dealing with COVID, but more importantly, how it increased conflict in the United States. And just, so there are lots of things that we could be doing, um, you know, and there's so many of our members that are doing this work. I mean, Patricia, she's in the schools, she's in the high schools doing this work. There's so much more we could be doing. But we first have to get people to understand that we do have instability here. And these are some of the reasons, right? So that, maybe people aren't racist, maybe they're afraid, that the country demographics are changing. Okay, I can deal with that. I can deal and talk about fear, right? Instead of, so I think those are some of the places we have to get to and to be able to work on programs at the community level, and then all the way up to get our leaders to, make changes, but we have to demand it.
Any last question, James? Jim Adams?
Yeah, well, the project that we're currently engaging in, the Boulder area, we've deemed it now the Boulder Builds Peace Initiative.
Love it.
And the way I interpret that is that it's developing, instituting in a way a positive peace practice mechanism, and building up a constituency, to use a dirty word, awareness raising,
Exactly.
um, about what the peace and conflict dynamics are.
Right.
And just on a very basic level, leaving out complex theory and such,
Mm-hmm.
and engaging other Rotary clubs in the area. And this could be duplicated anywhere, I suppose. Putting positive peace into practice, I think, naturally leads to discussions that otherwise wouldn't be occurring and can be
Mhm.
done safely, and in a civilized manner. And these constituencies can be networking, and the principles
Exactly.
involved can be cascading, for example, to establish or reestablish a dialogue support unit at the State Department, if that
Mm-hmm.
hasn't died already, and at the
We'll
UN.
get it back.
When I was working in Kosovo as a civil affairs officer with the UNMIC, the peacekeeping operation.
I was there.
Oh yeah,
I was working with the OSCE. I was writing the election laws.
yeah. I ran into a few of you folks there.
Yeah.
Critical work, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, and one thing that I became convinced of while I was there, and I even figured out more of what the hell I was looking at through studying conceptually peace and conflict at
Right.
George Mason University, the Carter School.
I teach there.
Yeah, well, excellent work again. And it became very clear to me that a missing piece in Kosovo and pretty much all peacekeeping operations was dialogue facilitation support and education. There were meetings and conferences held that were called peace conferences or peace building or negotiations and such, there was extremely little dialogue going on or understanding of dialogue. Essentially, it was establishing and holding on to the principles of negative peace.
Yeah.
Put a lid on the problem,
That's right.
on the violence, not talk about it, not really explain it. And that's not very useful, not very successful. So I am a full believer in the notion of promoting positive peace and putting positive peace into practice. And if I may unhumbly suggest that people have written about this. Slotkin explains much. And I know the author of a book called Peace and Conflict Citizens Edition, written for this kind of notion, this kind of effort. And I happen to be the author, so I know him pretty well. And I think sharing this effort at the municipal level, as has been stated, is crucial, and I think it can work. And so we're at the Boulder Rotary Club, and we're initiating discussions with other Rotary clubs to engage in a more concerted effort. The public education, the civic engagement on this, coordinating with numerous organizations in the area and tapping into the universities. It's possible to get this discussion, if you will, popularized, or at least on the radar, and move it ahead in building this constituency.
And with that, Jim, thank you.
Can I just say one last thing on that?
One last thing.
Yeah, one last thing. I couldn't agree with you more. And also remember, it's not like you just have to bring Democrats and Republicans together. I'd actually encourage you not to do that. What we're seeing on the left and the right is violent extremism growing, political violence on both the left and the right. In fact, left wing political violence actually has overtaken right wing in 2025 for the first time in 30 years. So you got to do a lot of in-group work as well. And so think about that. I think is a really important first step.
Yeah. If I
Thank you, Jim.
literally draw the picture of these dynamics, and I agree.
Thank you, Jim. I will close with saying that if the 34,000 plus Rotary clubs had both a Patricia Schaefer and a peace committee like the Boulder Rotary Club, there would be peace in the world now. And that's what we need. More of the Patricia Schaefers, more of the Boulder Rotary Club. What they are doing is pretty impressive. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everybody. Liz, we are indeed grateful for all your time, your knowledge, your expertise, your knowledge. And again, we thank you. And just a very brief, we're going to be dark next month so that our local Rotarians can go to the transition dinner for our incoming district governor. But in July, we're going to be very excited to have Monty Marshall, again, an extensive bio and peace research. Monty has directed the Center for Systemic Peace since 1997, which produces data information on conflict, governance, and development of 168 countries and so much more. Liz, we thank you. We are deeply indebted.